Let's jump right into this explainer because today we're exploring a truly fascinating concept, the very origin of histories. We're looking at how we actually began recording our past. It sounds like a massive philosophical topic, right? But honestly, the way human beings process, structure, and pass down time, that is a technology all on its own. We didn't always just have a neatly structured past. It's actually something we had to invent. To really grasp this, we have to start with a pretty profound question to ground ourselves. How do we actually know the past happened? And before you immediately think, well, because it's in a book somewhere, I want you to look back at the absolute void before human societies deliberately structured their stories. Try to imagine living in a time with literally no written records, no carefully curated timelines, no archives whatsoever. Everything you knew about your ancestors relied entirely on the fragile, kind of unreliable thread of human memory. It's a staggering thought, isn't it? Without a structured narrative, the past is incredibly elusive. Think about the sheer contrast between the past and history. They aren't the same thing at all. The past is the totality of absolutely everything. Every drop of rain, every whispered conversation, every mundane Tuesday that has ever existed since the dawn of time. It's massive and completely overwhelming to capture. But history is the deliberate narrative we actually chose to keep. It's highly curated, it's sorted, structured, and injected with meaning. We essentially took the wild, untamed forest of the past and built a highly manicured garden out of it, and we called that garden history. Let's move into our first major section, the threat of forgetting, and what this pre-narrative world actually looked like. Before the genesis of historical narrative, the past was essentially a void. Memories simply faded away because there was no structured way to preserve them. Just think about the sheer gravity of that for a second. If an early society achieved something incredible, or survived a terrible famine, or came up with a brilliant new philosophy, it was literally always at risk of being completely wiped from existence in just a generation or two. The void of unrecorded time wasn't just some minor inconvenience, it was a constant existential threat to human identity. Without a narrative to anchor them, societies were just kind of adrift in a sea of forgotten yesterdays. This brings us to Section 2, defining historical narrative, and how we moved beyond just raw data. See, history absolutely requires intent. It's a deliberate transition from merely existing to structurally recording and interpreting the origins of those histories. Early humans didn't just accidentally stumble into writing history. They hit a point where they recognized that merely existing just wasn't cutting it anymore. They had to construct a framework to interpret their origins, basically to ensure that their collective experiences would outlast their own mortal lives. It really is an incredibly empowering shift in human consciousness. We can actually track this conceptual evolution in three distinct stages. First up, we have myth. This was oral, it was highly fluid, and it focused way more on moral or spiritual truths rather than, hard literal facts. But as societies grew, they needed something a bit more concrete. That brings us to the record. These were raw, incredibly dry lists of data. Think of ancient green tallies or a rigid list of kings. Totally factual, sure, but completely lacking context. Finally, we get the massive breakthrough, historical narrative. This is where humans brilliantly combined the storytelling power of myth with the factual grounding of the record to create a structured, interpreted story of reality. Which leads perfectly into Section 3, the origin of histories, and exactly how those facts became stories. Following the timeline of this development, we can clearly trace the technological evolution of memory. For centuries upon centuries, humanity relied purely on those fluid oral traditions. Then, as civilizations got more complex, time starts to compress. We spend decades hyper-focused on raw event logging just to manage state economies and taxes. But then, a sudden acceleration happens. This profound urge to record completely takes over within a matter of years, driven by this intense desire to leave a legacy. And boom, that sparks the genesis, the birth of structured historical narrative. It's absolutely fascinating to watch how the pace of human self-awareness suddenly skyrockets the exact moment we realize we can control how the future remembers us. According to the source material, there were three specific components acting as the catalyst here, driving the need to meticulously record and structure these origins. First off, there had to be an intellectual transition from relying on myth to actually seeking an objective reality. Second, and let's be practical here, rulers desperately needed to establish political legitimacy. I mean, if you want to prove you have the divine right to rule, you need a structured historical narrative placing you right at the top of a long, highly justified lineage. And third, they finally acted on that fundamental, deeply human urge to record. We all just want to be known, right? We want to put a flag in the ground and say, we were here and this is what we did. And that brings us to our final section, why the past matters, along with some modern reflections. Just as those early societies invented historical narratives to preserve their legacy, we use the exact same principles today when we carefully curate our own digital timelines. Think about it for a second. Every single time you post on social media, or update your professional profile, or even just organize the photos on your phone, you are structuring a personal narrative. You are looking at the raw, totally chaotic past of your daily life, and you are actively choosing what becomes your history. You decide what gets highlighted, and maybe even more importantly, you choose what not to forget. We are literally all participating in the genesis of our own miniature historical narratives every single day. Ultimately, this core concept encapsulates the overarching theme of this whole explainer. History is an active creation. It's an origin story in itself. History isn't just something that passively happens to us. It's a profound technology we use to make sense of time. The very act of writing history is, paradoxically, the very first historical event of any truly self-aware civilization. By choosing to record the origin of histories, humanity officially stepped out of the void of forgotten time and right into the light of shared, structured memory. So, I want to leave you with this final thought to really spark your curiosity going forward. What historical narratives are you accepting in your daily life? When you read a news article, watch a documentary, or even listen to a story told by a family member, try to remember the stark difference between the chaotic past and curated history. Ask yourself, who structured that narrative? What raw data was deliberately left out and why? History is a remarkably powerful, deliberate tool. Understanding its origins totally empowers you to look at the stories of today with a much sharper, much more analytical eye. Keep questioning, keep learning, and definitely pay attention to the histories being constructed all around you right now.